There was once a man who lived in a small village nestled between two towering mountains. His name was forgotten by most, but his story was etched into the hearts of those who knew him. He was a blacksmith, a craftsman of fire and iron, whose hands bore the scars of countless battles with the forge. But his greatest battle was not with the metal he shaped, it was with the storm that raged within him. Anger. It was his constant companion, a shadow that followed him everywhere, whispering in his ear, urging him to lash out, to break, to burn, and for years, he obeyed it. His temper was legendary, a wildfire that consumed everything in its path. His wife left him, his friends grew distant, and even the villagers, who once admired his skill, began to avoid him. He was alone, trapped in a cage of his own making. One day, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the village, a traveler arrived. He was an old man, bent with age, his face lined with the wisdom of countless journeys. He carried nothing but a small satchel and a walking stick. Yet there was something about him that commanded attention. The blacksmith, who was hammering away at a piece of iron, noticed the traveler standing at the edge of his workshop, watching him with calm, piercing eyes. Irritated, the blacksmith slammed his hammer down and barked. "What do you want?" The old man smiled faintly and said, "I've come to learn from you." The blacksmith scoffed. "Learn what? How to ruin your life with anger?" The old man's smile didn't waver. "No," he said, "I've come to learn how to shape fire." The blacksmith was taken aback. No one had ever asked him that before. They always wanted swords, tools, or horseshoes, things they could hold, things they could use. But fire was wild, untamable, dangerous. It was the very thing that mirrored his own soul. He hesitated, then nodded. "Fine," he said, "but don't blame me if you get burned." The old man simply bowed his head and followed him inside. For days, the blacksmith worked, teaching the old man the basics of the forge. He showed him how to stoke the flames, how to temper the metal, how to shape it with precision. But the old man didn't seem interested in the metal. Instead, he watched the fire, its flickering dance, its shifting colors, its unpredictable nature. He would sit for hours, staring into the flames, as if listening to a story only he could hear. The blacksmith grew impatient. "What are you doing?" he snapped one evening. "You're supposed to be learning, not daydreaming." The old man looked up, his eyes reflecting the glow of the forge. "I am learning," he said softly. "I'm learning how to listen." The blacksmith frowned. "Listen? To what? The fire doesn't speak." The old man shook his head. "It speaks in its own way. It teaches us about control, about balance. Too much, and it consumes. Too little, and it dies. It is a mirror, showing us what we cannot see in ourselves." The blacksmith felt a flicker of unease. He turned away, muttering, "You're wasting my time." But the old man's words lingered in his mind, like an ember that refused to go out. That night, as the blacksmith lay in his bed, he found himself thinking about the fire. He thought about how it had always been a part of him, how it had shaped him, how it had destroyed him. He thought about the old man's words, about control, about balance, and for the first time, he wondered if his anger was not something to be fought, but something to be understood. The next morning, he returned to the forge, determined to prove the old man wrong. He stoked the flames until they roared, then grabbed a piece of iron and began to hammer it with all his strength. But as he worked, he noticed something strange. The metal wasn't bending to his will. It was resisting, cracking, breaking. Frustrated, he threw the hammer down and shouted, "Why won't it obey me?" The old man, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward. "Because you are not listening," he said. "You are forcing, not shaping. You are fighting the fire, not working with it." The blacksmith stared at him, his chest heaving. "What do you mean?" The old man gestured to the flames. "The fire is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It shows you where you are out of balance, where you are too harsh, too impatient. If you listen, it will guide you." The blacksmith hesitated, then nodded slowly. He took a deep breath and picked up the hammer again. This time, he didn't strike with force. He struck with intention. He watched the flames, felt their heat, and let them guide his hand. And slowly, the metal began to change. It became pliable, obedient, beautiful. As the days passed, the blacksmith found himself changing too. His anger didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled him. He began to see it as a tool, something he could use to create, not destroy. He learned to listen, to the fire, to the metal, to the silence within himself. And in that silence, he found a peace he had never known. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, the old man prepared to leave. The blacksmith, now calm and steady, approached him. "Thank you," he said. "You've taught me more than I ever expected." The old man smiled. "I taught you nothing," he said. "You taught yourself. I simply showed you how to listen." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving the blacksmith standing in the glow of the forge, the flames dancing in his eyes. From that day on, the blacksmith was a different man. His work became renowned, not just for its beauty, but for the spirit it carried. People came from far and wide to see the man who had tamed the fire within him. And though he never spoke of the old man again, he often found himself gazing into the flames, listening to their quiet wisdom, and remembering the lesson that had changed his life: that true mastery is not about controlling the storm, but about learning to dance in the rain.